When you look at things from a scheduling standpoint, there's various levels of schedules and there's roll-ups. So they're giving you like a roll-up with a milestone basis. Maybe if they drill down one a little bit further, maybe you could do a better job of supporting their needs. So that's another way of communicating with them, because forecasting, again, was cited. So this is the message I'd like to send for contractors to move from lowering their initial costs and move towards increasing their productivity. Because if the focus is on initial costs, they're always going to be working in an environment where it's competitively based, in the sense of going out for pricing from multiple suppliers. They're going to be looking at initial costs only. They're not going to be examining additional services and how you can affect and help them with their overall productivity. So it's a mindset paradigm type of shift from focusing just within this perspective to this perspective, making you more of a partner in the entire relationship of the building construction and not just a material supplier. And that's why, broadly based, don't look at initial costs, look at increasing your productivity. Stop shopping with different distributors for materials. Implement value-added services in key areas. One of the findings of the case studies was vendor-managed inventory. That wasn't the highest on the list in terms of rank order of requested services where you were compensated, but it certainly was within that range, above 20%. This is one of those areas where we've presented the survey results in terms of the raw ranking of what services are provided, where they've been compensated, but that doesn't necessarily say that those services where there's a great deal of value added, that would be a qualitative type of decision. But the case studies have made a strong and compelling case that vendor-managed inventory were one of the areas that you should look at immediately. So let me ask you that. How many of you have a value-managed inventory approach with contractors where you are compensated? And yet the case studies, every single one of the case studies showed that to be a recommendation. All right. Do you provide value-managed inventory uncompensated? How about that? How many of you provide value-managed inventory uncompensated? A few of you, okay. Well, that is certainly one area I would start a dialogue, all right? And we can take a look at the case studies to see some of the raw results there too. Know your performance indicators and anticipate project requirements. Again, based upon the ability to forecast, based upon a more collaborative way of looking at things. All right, so that was some of the information in the executive summary portion of the report, okay? So a little bit more background on the survey itself. It closed on July 24th, quite some time ago. We had approximately 250 NAED and NECA members collectively who responded. You can see that it was 80 contractors, 135 distributors, 28 manufacturers. It definitely was biased more towards distributors, and then if you include manufacturers, even more so. But 80 was a healthy amount of contractors who responded. In previous studies that I've worked with NECA members on, we did one for building information modeling and shop fabrication for pre-installation. And on that survey, we only had 50 who responded. That was a few years ago, but we got 80. I was pleased with that, having that amount. The questions that were asked, there were 10 questions that were asked across the board, all supply chain members. You can see them here. You've got them in front of you in the packets. That was one of the ones I think that was listed. We can go through them in more detail, but basically they wanted to set a context. So, what is your role, manufacturer, distributor, contractor, your annual revenue, where are you located, and a ranking of your market sectors in terms of revenue. So those were background, yeah?
Maybe you covered this in the beginning, but what was the purpose of having manufacturers in this survey?
Because we're looking at it from a total supply chain standpoint, so we wanted to get beginning to end. From a participation standpoint, in terms of the raw numbers, you could see that they weren't a large player, but they weren't insignificant either. They did have an involvement. Then we wanted to find out some specifics. And we were predisposed to certain ideas. For instance, having multiple suppliers as opposed to a single is going to lead towards more purchase orders. Well, that is intuitive. But we wanted to get the quantitative data on it. So we asked, what's the typical cost to generate a PO? How many POs do you produce? And again, we looked at it from an aggregate average standpoint. It would really vary depending upon the size of the project and maybe even the market sector. But nonetheless, we do have some data backing it up. We asked if we wanted to get an idea of services that you could offer, and if contractors were precluded from engaging you in those services based upon labor agreements. So we asked the question, do labor agreements allow the following? And there were a number of different things asked in terms of what they were. What's your biggest headaches? That was a very good one because it gave a lot of feedback. We listed potential ones, and we used that as an area that we focused on in terms of headaches by size of firm, headaches by region, and so forth. What steps do you plan to take to improve collaboration and what you were in terms of a member, NECA, Electri, or NAED? Then there were questions that were specific just to manufacturers and distributors. So that was 5 questions. Remember, we wanted 15 in total. So here was 10 asked of manufacturers and distributors. Here were 5 more. So those were the 15 that we had for manufacturers and distributors. The first was based upon terms and conditions include a partnering type of arrangement. The next were how do you communicate with channel partners, describing relationships, the frequency of communications, and that's about it in terms of those questions. There were 12 asked of contractors. We did ask more of contractors, and we drilled down more as well in terms of some of the responses. What's your typical success rate for short interval scheduling? With the intent, again, of asking how successful they were in aggregate for their SIS, and then the corollary to that is assumed that your SIS is negatively impacted. In other words, if you didn't reach 100%, and no contractor really gets 100% in terms of their short interval scheduling. So if you were negatively impacted, what percentage of that SAS was due to material ordering, receipt, or handling issues? Again, trying to build a compelling case that if you collaborate more, or if you go to a vendor-managed inventory approach, that risk is now passed on to you as a supplier, but with the intent that you can do a better job of managing material movement than the contractor. Then what's your best estimate amount of time that's lost to those issues? Then we asked a question in terms of waste and theft regarding materials. Then we launched into the series of questions that you saw the results of: ordering services, office and accounting, shipping and receiving, warehousing, and pre-installation and job site management. That took us from question 5 to question 10. 11 is regarding the nature of the relationship and the collaboration. So we had all those questions. We have all the raw data for all those questions. And having the raw data then allows you to do filtering and sorting based upon that raw data. So we look at not just the answer to a specific category, but we look at the answer to a specific category and compare it to another question. And this is where we can come up with levels of granularity, like what issues are in what region, or what issues are based upon what firm size, and so forth. And so we decided to slice and dice and look at a variety of different responses. So we just picked some based upon where we thought there could be some information that stood out. So we start with some basics, and so there's a series of filters here and here. Those are the summation of all the filters, and I'll show you the results on the next few slides. So this is an example of supply chain partner versus revenue. So for instance, you can see in the color coding at the bottom, distributor, contractor, manufacturer. It's in that order as well. And you can see less than 10 million, and then as we go up. Again, this can give you the data in terms of where different supply chain partners are in terms of revenue and distribution. For instance, should come as no surprise, I'd heard this before, and when I first heard it, I was surprised, but half or more of the NECA members are $10 million or less in annual revenue. So less than 10 million, that's where the largest bar is for contractors. And you can see it's not the same for distributors. Distributors, the peak bar is 25 to 50 million. But it's not that, it doesn't fall off that much across, with the exception of this category here, 400 to 800 million. And then from a manufacturer standpoint, it should also come as no surprise that you're peaking as you're going higher. So from a contractor standpoint, less than 10 million. From a manufacturing standpoint, greater than 800 million. That's where the largest amounts of the responses occurred. And the distributors effectively within the middle. This just sets it in perspective, all right? Membership versus supply chain partner. We've got it sorted by NAED, Electri, NECA, and then we threw in none so we could get full responses. And you can see, in terms of NAED, a large amount of responses. Now, this is not as a percentage. This is in terms of total responses. And since distributors were the largest category of responses, it comes as no surprise that the membership was highest for NAED members, right? But, so distributors, principally in NAED, contractors, principally in Electri, okay? And then in NECA, we actually have a sizable amount of distributors and contractors as well, which you would anticipate. And then this is a reverse order of the question. This is ranking of membership in a different, this is supply chain partner versus membership, where this is membership versus supply chain partner. Anyway, we can go into it more, but it's somewhat similar information. Difficult to see, but I'll explain it to you and I'll show you why I wanted to compress it all on one slide. First, for the purposes of comparison. So this is asking a question of regionally based and whether or not you're, you could participate in certain services. And so this is how to look at the bars, all right? First, in terms of color, first, let me just tell you, the first collective set is Eastern region. That goes down to this level. Then is South Central region, then is Western region. And in the Eastern region, we have different categories. Unfortunately, in a conversion, this was somewhat skewed. So those three bars there, the very first three, those are prefabrication. So, for instance, Eastern region, contractor may specify the top bar, no, labor unions don't allow it, or yes, labor unions do allow prefabrication if the assembly has a design or designated part number as included in a catalog. So under those conditions, you can see that in the Eastern region, the labor agreements allow for that, the most significant. 15 responses were yes, and only 5 were no. But if you change it and say just supplier distributor prefabrication and not make it where it's a part in a catalog, the 15 drops down to 10 and your no's are almost the same. So for instance, this says in the Eastern region, it was almost equally balanced between allowed and not allowed for supplier distributor prefabrication. You come over to the Western region, And you see, here's the bars. Again, like I say, they're skewed one level down. Supplier distributor prefabrication, over 20 we had that allowed and only 10 not allowed. Where I'm from in California, it's quite common for prefabrication to be used, and the labor agreements allow for it. And so one of the data that we saw here is within the eastern region, it's not so readily acceptable. Anybody have any thoughts on, does that confirm or not confirm your thoughts?